The sound of my own son's hand hitting my cheek echoed through the dining room like a gunshot, silencing the laughter of my grandchildren and freezing time itself. As I stood there, my face stinging and my heart shattering, Richard, my baby boy who I'd raised alone after his father died, towered over me with eyes full of hatred and screamed words that would haunt me forever. "This isn't your home anymore, Mom. Get out." In that moment, I realized that the son I'd sacrificed everything for had become a stranger, and the home I'd built with love had become my prison. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 68 years old, and for the past 42 years, I've been both mother and father to my son Richard. When my husband James died in a construction accident, leaving us with a half-built house and a mountain of debt, Richard was only 12 years old. He was my whole world, and I was determined to give him the life his father would have wanted. I remember those early days so clearly, working double shifts as a substitute teacher while finishing my education degree at night. Richard would do his homework at the kitchen table while I graded papers, both of us burning the midnight oil. When he'd fall asleep over his books, I'd carry him to bed and tuck him in, whispering the same words every night. "You're going to do great things, my boy. Mommy believes in you." And he did do great things. Richard was brilliant, always at the top of his class, captain of the debate team, president of the National Honor Society. When he got accepted to medical school, I cried tears of joy for 3 days straight. It didn't matter that I had to take out a second mortgage on our home to help pay for his education. It didn't matter that I wore the same 3 dresses to work for 2 years running. My boy was going to be a doctor. The house we lived in wasn't much to look at from the outside, a modest 2-story colonial that James and I had started building with our own hands. But inside, it was filled with love and memories. Every room told a story. The kitchen where I taught Richard to cook his first scrambled eggs. The living room where we'd watch movies together every Friday night, sharing a bowl of popcorn and arguing about whether the good guy would win. The small bedroom that became his study when he outgrew sharing space with his medical textbooks. After James died, I'd kept his tools in the garage exactly where he left them. Sometimes, when the loneliness got too heavy, I'd go out there and just touch them, remembering how his hands had held them, how he'd planned to build Richard a treehouse in the old oak out back. One day, I'd whisper to those silent tools, "One day our boy will understand how much love went into every nail and every board of this house." Richard graduated medical school with honors and completed his residency in cardiology. I was so proud I thought my heart might burst. At his graduation ceremony, when they called his name, Dr. Richard Thompson, I stood up and cheered so loud that people 3 rows away turned to look. He found me in the crowd afterward, wrapped me in the biggest hug, and said, "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom. Thank you for believing in me." Those were the words I held on to during the years that followed. When he got busy with his practice and our weekly phone calls became monthly check-ins, when he moved across town to a fancy neighborhood and our Sunday dinners became holiday obligations, when he met Jessica was beautiful, I'll give her that. 28 years old with the kind of polished perfection that comes from expensive salons and personal trainers. She had one of those social media careers that I didn't quite understand, something about lifestyle influencing and brand partnerships. What I did understand was the way she looked at our modest home during their first visit. Her eyes swept over my carefully maintained, but clearly dated furniture, my collection of family photos on the mantel, my small kitchen with its cheerful yellow curtains, and I saw her judgment clear as day. "It's so quaint," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But Richard loved her, and that was enough for me. I welcomed her into our family with open arms, the same way I'd welcomed every friend Richard had ever brought home. When they got engaged, I offered to help plan the wedding. When Jessica mentioned that her dream photographer was booked, I dipped into my retirement savings to hire him as my gift to them. When she hinted that the reception venue she wanted was out of their budget, I quietly took out a small loan against the house to help cover the difference. "You don't have to do this, Mom," Richard said when he found out about my contribution. "Of course I do," I told him, straightening his tie before the ceremony. "This is your special day. I wanted to be perfect. The wedding was beautiful. Jessica looked like a princess, and Richard looked happier than I'd seen him since he was a little boy opening Christmas presents. When they danced their first dance, I dabbed at my eyes with my handkerchief and thought about how James would have loved to see this moment. Our son, all grown up and starting his own family. After the honeymoon, they moved into a big house in the suburbs, the kind of place with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool that I'd only ever seen in magazines. I was thrilled for them, even though it meant Richard was now 30 minutes away instead of 10. When Jessica got pregnant with their first child, I was over the moon. I was going to be a grandmother. "I hope you'll help out with babysitting, Mom," Richard said during one of our dinners. "Jessica's career is really taking off, and we could use the support." I wouldn't miss it for the world, I promised, and I meant it. When little Emma was born, followed 2 years later by her brother Jake, I threw myself into grandmotherhood with the same dedication I'd shown as a mother. I babysat 3 days a week so Jessica could work on her social media content. I cooked meals and brought them over on busy nights. I helped with bath time, story time, and the countless small emergencies that come with raising small children. The kids loved coming to my house. "Grandma's house is more fun," Emma declared one day, and my heart swelled with pride. At my house, they could play in the garden, help me bake cookies, and listen to stories about their grandfather James and their daddy when he was little. At my house, they weren't hustled from activity to activity or told to be quiet while Mommy filmed her videos. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Richard was successful, the grandchildren were thriving, and I felt useful and needed. I was living the life I'd dreamed of during those long, lonely years after James died, but then I started noticing small changes. The way Jessica would sigh when I offered suggestions about the children's bedtime routines. The way Richard's jaw would tighten when I mentioned needing repairs done on my house. The hushed conversations that would stop abruptly when I walked into the room during family gatherings. "Maybe it's time to think about downsizing, Mom," Richard said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. The children were playing in the living room, and Jessica was in the bathroom doing what she called touching up her content. Downsizing. I looked around the kitchen where I'd raised him, where I'd packed his school lunches for 12 years, where I'd celebrated every one of his achievements. "But honey, this is our home. This is where you grew up." "That's exactly my point," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I'm grown up now, and this house is too big for just you. Think about how much easier your life would be in a nice retirement community. No maintenance, no yard work, built-in social activities." The words stung, but I tried to keep my voice light. "I'm only 68, Richard. I'm hardly ready for a retirement home. And besides, who would watch Emma and Jake?" Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or frustration. "We can figure that out, Mom. The important thing is what's best for you." But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd shared with James for 15 years, I couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation hadn't really been about what was best for me at all. Over the following months, the hints became less subtle. Jessica would mention how hard it must be for me to maintain such a big house. Richard would bring up articles he'd read about seniors aging in place safely. They started suggesting specific retirement communities, bringing me brochures, even offering to take me on tours. "Just to look," Jessica would say with that practiced smile. "It never hurts to explore your options." But I didn't want to explore my options. I wanted to stay in the home where every corner held memories, where James's presence still lingered in the smell of sawdust from the garage and the roses he'd planted by the front porch. I wanted to be available for my grandchildren, to be part of their daily lives the way my own grandmother had been part of mine. The pressure intensified after Jessica announced she was pregnant with their third child. Suddenly, every conversation seemed to circle back to my living situation. "With another baby coming, we're going to be even busier," Richard explained during one particularly tense dinner. "It just makes sense for you to be somewhere with more support systems in place." "But I'm happy to help more, not less," I protested. "I can." "Mom, you're almost 70, he interrupted, and there was an edge to his voice I'd never heard before. "You need to start thinking realistically about your future." The hurt must have shown on my face, because he immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry. I'm just worried about you, that's all. This house is a lot of responsibility." I wanted to tell him that I'd been managing this responsibility just fine for 35 years. I wanted to remind him that I was the one who'd raised him in this house, who'd kept it running through good times and bad, who'd sacrificed my own dreams to make sure he had everything he needed. But I held my tongue, because I could see the stress lines around his eyes, and I knew that with another baby coming, he was feeling overwhelmed. "Let me think about it," I said finally, and he smiled with what looked like relief. But thinking about it only made me more certain that I wasn't ready to give up my independence, my home, or my role in my grandchildren's lives. This house wasn't just where I lived, it was who I was. It was the foundation upon which I'd built my life as a mother, and now as a grandmother. I just didn't realize yet how far Richard and Jessica were willing to go to get what they wanted, or how little my own wishes would matter in their plans. The first real crack in my perfect family picture appeared on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 months after Jessica announced her third pregnancy. I was in my kitchen, preparing lunch for Emma and Jake, who I was watching while Jessica had a doctor's appointment, when I heard Richard's voice coming from the living room. He must have let himself in with his key while I was busy chopping vegetables. I smiled, thinking he'd come to surprise the kids, but as I moved closer to greet him, I realized he was on the phone. "No, Jessica, she's not going to just agree to move," he was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "You don't know my mother like I do. She's stubborn as a mule when she sets her mind to something." I froze in the doorway, my heart starting to pound. The children were playing quietly in the sunroom, oblivious to their father's presence. "I know we agreed on the timeline, but we can't just force her out," Richard continued. "Look, I understand the house would be perfect for us. The yard is twice the size of ours. It's in a great school district, and yes, it would save us a fortune on childcare if we didn't have to drive the kids back and forth. But Mom thinks of this place as some kind of shrine to Dad." My legs felt weak. I gripped the doorframe, trying to process what I was hearing. "What do you mean, make it uncomfortable for her?" Richard's voice had dropped lower, and I had to strain to hear. "Jessica, we can't. No, I'm not going to sabotage anything. She's my mother, for God's sake." There was a long pause, and I could almost hear Jessica's voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out her words. "Fine," Richard said finally, sounding defeated. "We'll try your way first. But if this backfires, it's on you." I heard him moving toward the kitchen and quickly retreated, my hands shaking as I resumed chopping carrots with unnecessary vigor. When he appeared in the doorway, I looked up with what I hoped was a natural smile. "Richard, what a nice surprise. The kids will be so excited to see you." He looked startled, almost guilty. "Oh, hi Mom. I finished my morning appointments early and thought I'd stop by." "Of course, honey. You know you're always welcome." I gestured toward the counter where I was preparing lunch. "Perfect timing. I was just making grilled cheese and tomato soup. Your favorite when you were little, remember?" Something flickered across his face. Was it regret? Nostalgia? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Actually, I can't stay long," he said. "I just wanted to check on you. See how you're doing." "I'm doing wonderfully," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the conversation I just overheard. "The kids are angels, as always. Emma helped me water the garden this morning, and Jake found a caterpillar that we're keeping in a jar to watch it transform. That's great, Mom." He seemed distracted, checking his watch. "Listen, I've been thinking more about what we discussed, about you maybe looking into some alternative living situations." My stomach clenched, but I kept chopping. "There's this beautiful place called Sunset Manor about 15 minutes from our house. It's not like those old nursing homes you're probably thinking of. It's more like a luxury apartment complex, but with services. Housekeeping, meal plans, social activities, even a fitness center." I set down my knife and turned to face him fully. "Richard, sweetheart, I've told you, I'm happy here. This is my home, but Mom, think about it practically. The upkeep on this place must be exhausting. The roof is going to need replacing soon, the furnace is ancient, and winter's coming. Wouldn't it be nice to not have to worry about any of that?" He was right about the house needing work. The roof had a few missing shingles from the last storm, and the furnace had been making odd noises. But these seemed like manageable problems, not reasons to abandon my entire life. "I can handle the maintenance, Richard. I've been doing it for years. You've been doing it with Dad's help," he said gently. "And then with mine. But I'm busy with my practice now, and with another baby coming." The implication hung in the air between us. He wouldn't be available to help anymore. "I understand you're busy," I said carefully. I would never want to be a burden. You're not a burden, he said quickly, but something in his tone made me doubt his sincerity. I just worry about you here all alone. What if something happened? What if you fell or had a medical emergency? I have neighbors, Richard. Mrs. Martinez next door checks on me every day. And I have my emergency alert necklace that you insisted I get. Remember? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd made since childhood when he was frustrated. Mom, I'm trying to look out for your best interests here. I know you are, honey. But my best interests include staying in my own home, near my grandchildren, living independently for as long as I can. We stared at each other across my cheerful yellow kitchen, and for the first time in my son's life, I felt like we were on opposite sides of something important. Just think about it, okay? He said finally. Maybe we could visit Sunset Manor together. Just to look. Before I could answer, Emma came running into the kitchen.
Daddy, Daddy! Come see the caterpillar!
Grandma says it's going to turn into a butterfly. Richard's face transformed as he scooped up his daughter, and for a moment, he looked like the little boy I'd raised. A butterfly. That's amazing. Sweetheart, show me everything. As I watched him follow Emma to the sunroom, Jake trailing behind them with excited chatter about their nature discovery, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. This was exactly what I wanted. My son with his children in the home where he'd grown up, making new memories in the place where we'd made so many beautiful ones together. But after what I'd overheard, I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard was seeing something entirely different. Where I saw family continuity and precious moments, he was calculating square footage and childcare savings. After he left, I sat in my living room surrounded by photos spanning 4 decades. Richard as a gap-toothed 7-year-old holding his first fish. Richard in his cap and gown at high school graduation. Richard and Jessica's wedding day. Emma's first steps, taken right here in this very room. Every picture told the story of a family rooted in love, sacrifice, and this house that had sheltered us through everything. But now I was beginning to understand that Richard and Jessica were writing a different story, one where I was an obstacle rather than the foundation. The signs became impossible to ignore after that day. Jessica started making comments about my housekeeping when she dropped off the children. "Oh, Maggie, you really should let me help you declutter," she'd say, looking around my living room with its comfortable furniture and family mementos. "All these old things must be exhausting to dust." She brought me pamphlets about estate sales and donation centers. Just in case I ever wanted to simplify. She mentioned repeatedly how much easier life was in her modern, minimalist house with its efficient systems and contemporary conveniences. Richard began pointing out every small maintenance issue as if it were a crisis. A dripping faucet became evidence that the plumbing was failing. A flickering light bulb meant the electrical system was dangerous. The creaky step I'd been meaning to fix for months was suddenly a fall hazard that could result in serious injury. "I'm just concerned about your safety, Mom," he'd say, but his concern felt calculated rather than genuine. They started arriving unannounced, always together, always with the same agenda. They'd walk through my house pointing out problems, suggesting improvements that would cost thousands of dollars, then pivoting to how much simpler life would be at Sunset Manor. "Look at this kitchen," Jessica said during one of these impromptu visits. "These cabinets are so dated, and the appliances are practically antiques. At Sunset Manor, everything would be brand new and energy efficient." "I like my kitchen," I said quietly. "Richard learned to cook in this kitchen." "That's sweet, Maggie," Jessica replied with that patronizing smile. "But sentimentality isn't practical. You need to think about what makes sense for your future." The breaking point came on a cold November evening. I was making dinner for Emma and Jake, who were staying overnight while Richard and Jessica attended some medical conference. The children had helped me make homemade pizza, and we were laughing about the funny shapes we'd created when Richard and Jessica arrived home unexpectedly. "We decided to skip the dinner," Richard explained, but his eyes were scanning my kitchen with disapproval. "The conference was boring, and we wanted to get the kids." "But I made pizza," Emma protested. "Grandma let me make a butterfly shape, and Jake made a dinosaur. That's nice, sweetheart, but it's a school night," Jessica said briskly. "You need to get home for your bath and bedtime routine." I watched as they bustled the children out the door, cutting short what should have been a lovely evening together. Emma looked back at me with confused, disappointed eyes, and I had to turn away to keep from crying. After they left, I sat alone in my kitchen. looking at the half-eaten pizzas we'd made with such joy just an hour before. For the first time since this whole campaign began, I allowed myself to truly consider what was happening. My son and his wife didn't just want me to move out of my house. They wanted my house. They wanted to erase me from the equation entirely, to step into my life and claim everything I'd built as their own. And they were willing to manipulate me, guilt me, and isolate me from my grandchildren to get it. I went to bed that night feeling more alone than I had since James died. But somewhere in that loneliness, something else was growing. A tiny seed of anger that would eventually bloom into the strength I didn't know I still possessed. I just didn't know yet that things were about to get much, much worse. The morning after Richard and Jessica cut short the children's sleepover, I woke up with red, swollen eyes from crying and a heaviness in my chest that felt like I was carrying stones. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the garden where James and I had planted our first tomatoes 35 years ago. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't notice Eleanor Martinez from next door until she was knocking on my back door, holding a plate covered with a cheerful dish towel. "Maggie, honey, I brought you some of my cinnamon rolls," she called through the glass. I made way too many for just me. Eleanor had been my neighbor for 15 years, ever since she moved in after her husband passed. She was 71, 3 years older than me, but she had the energy of someone half her age. A retired social worker with silver hair that she wore in a stylish bob and eyes that seemed to see everything, Eleanor had become one of my closest friends. I opened the door with what I hoped was a normal smile. "Eleanor, how thoughtful. Come in, come in. I just made tea." But Eleanor took one look at my face and set the plate down on the counter with more force than necessary. "Margaret Thompson, what has happened? And don't you dare tell me nothing, because I've known you long enough to recognize when you've been crying." Something about her direct, no nonsense tone broke through the wall I'd been trying to build around my emotions. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything: the overheard phone conversation, the constant pressure to move, the way they'd rushed the children out the night before, cutting short what should have been a precious evening together. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail I shared. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands wrapped around her teacup. "Maggie," she said finally, "how long has this been going on?" "A few months, I suppose, maybe longer. It started so gradually that I didn't really notice at first." Eleanor shook her head. "Honey, I hate to say this, but what you're describing sounds like classic elder manipulation. I've seen it dozens of times in my career." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Elder manipulation, Eleanor, that's a terrible thing to say about Richard. He's my son. He loves me. I'm sure he does love you," Eleanor said gently, "but love and manipulation aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes people convince themselves that what they want is what's best for everyone else, especially when there's something valuable at stake." "Valuable?" Eleanor gestured around my kitchen. "Maggie, do you have any idea what this house is worth? A 4-bedroom colonial on a half-acre lot in this neighborhood. With the way property values have gone up, I'd guess it's worth at least $400,000, maybe more." The number took my breath away. When James and I bought this lot, we paid $12,000 for it. We built the house ourselves, room by room, as we could afford the materials. I knew property values had increased, but I'd never really thought about it in concrete terms. I whispered. "Probably more," Eleanor said matter-of-factly. "And if Richard and Jessica are struggling financially, which many young families are these days, even with good incomes, well, moving into a paid-off house while convincing you to go to a facility that costs $3,000 or $4,000 a month would solve a lot of their problems." I felt sick. "You think they're manipulating me for money?" "I think they're manipulating you, period. Whether it's for money or convenience or both doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're being pressured to give up your home, your independence, and your role in your grandchildren's lives. And you're being made to feel like it's for your own good." Eleanor reached across the table and took my hand. "Maggie, I want you to think about something. When was the last time Richard or Jessica asked you what you wanted? Not what you thought about their suggestions, but what you actually wanted for your own life." I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. I couldn't remember a single conversation where they'd asked about my dreams, my plans, my wishes for my own future. Every discussion had been framed around their concerns, Their suggestions, their vision of what would be best for me. That's what I thought, Eleanor said sadly. Honey, you raised that boy by yourself after James died. You sacrificed your own dreams to make sure he had everything he needed. You put him through college and medical school, helped pay for his wedding, and now you provide free childcare for his family. You've given him everything, and now he wants the one thing you have left, your home. Tears started flowing again, but this time they felt different. Less like sadness and more like recognition of a painful truth I'd been avoiding. What am I supposed to do? I asked. He's my son. I don't want to lose him. Or the grandchildren. You're not going to lose him, Eleanor said firmly. But you might need to remind him who he's dealing with. You're not some helpless old lady who needs to be managed, Maggie. You're a strong, intelligent woman who raised a successful child and has every right to make her own decisions about her own life. Over the following days, Eleanor became my lifeline. She helped me see patterns I'd been missing. How Richard and Jessica would gang up on me during their visits, how they'd bring up my age and supposed frailties whenever I expressed independence, how they'd use the grandchildren as leverage by limiting my time with them when I didn't cooperate with their agenda. It's classic manipulation, Eleanor explained during one of our long talks. They're isolating you from your support system. Notice how they always cut short your time with the kids. They're making you question your own judgment by constantly pointing out problems with your house and your choices. And they're wearing you down with repetition, bringing up the same arguments over and over until you're too exhausted to keep fighting. Eleanor also helped me understand something else. I wasn't powerless in this situation. Maggie, whose name is on the deed to this house, she asked one afternoon as we sat in my living room, mine, of course. James and I bought it together, and when he died, it transferred to me. And have you ever signed any papers giving Richard any legal claim to it? No, never? Then he has no right to pressure you to leave. This is your home, and you get to decide what happens to it and when. But even as Eleanor helped me regain some perspective, the pressure from Richard and Jessica intensified. They started visiting more frequently, always together, always with new arguments for why I should move. They brought me printouts of real estate listings, showing me what my house might sell for. They brought me more brochures for retirement communities, each one more expensive than the last. They started making pointed comments about my finances. Mom, do you really think it's wise to keep all your equity tied up in this house? Richard asked during one particularly uncomfortable visit. You could sell, move somewhere more manageable, and have a nice nest egg for your retirement years. I am retired, Richard, and I'm managing just fine, but what about medical expenses? Long-term care? You can't rely on Medicare for everything. Jessica chimed in with her practiced concerned expression. We just want to make sure you're prepared for whatever the future brings, Maggie. None of us are getting any younger. It was Eleanor who pointed out the cruelty in that statement. She's trying to scare you into thinking you're on the brink of needing expensive care, she said, when I told her about the conversation. You're 68 years old and in good health, Maggie. Your own mother lived independently until she was 86. But the constant pressure was wearing me down. I found myself second, guessing decisions I'd never questioned before. Was I being stubborn? Was I putting my own desires ahead of practical considerations? Was I becoming a burden to my family without realizing it? The turning point came on a gray December afternoon. I was decorating for Christmas, something I'd done with joy every year since Richard was born, when Jessica and Richard arrived unannounced. Again, "Oh, Maggie," Jessica said, looking around at my festive decorations with what looked like pity. This must be so much work for you. All this climbing up and down ladders, moving furniture around. Aren't you worried about falling? I've been decorating this house for Christmas for 35 years, I said quietly. I think I know how to do it safely. But at your age, Richard started. At my age, what? I interrupted, surprising myself with the sharpness in my voice. At my age, I should just give up on everything that brings me joy. At my age, I should let other people make all my decisions for me. Richard and Jessica exchanged one of those looks, the kind of look that passes between parents when their child is having an unreasonable tantrum. Mom, we're just concerned about you, Richard said in that patronizing tone I was learning to hate. No, I said, and the words seemed to echo through my cheerfully decorated living room. No, you're not concerned about me. You're concerned about yourselves. You want my house, and you're trying to manipulate me into giving it to you. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's mouth fell open, and Richard's face flushed red. "Mom, that's a terrible thing to say," Richard stammered. "We would never, wouldn't you?" I asked. "Then explain to me why every conversation we have ends with you telling me I should move out of my own home. Explain to me why you cut short the children's visits whenever I don't agree with your suggestions. Explain to me why you never ask what I want, only what you think I should do." For the first time since this whole campaign began, Richard looked genuinely uncomfortable. We just want what's best for you. What's best for me is to live in my own home, with my independence intact, close to my grandchildren," I said firmly. "If that's not what you want, then we have a problem." They left shortly after that, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of my own power. Eleanor was right. This was my house, my life, and my choice to make. But as I watched them drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just declared war on my own family, and I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. That night, as I sat in my living room surrounded by Christmas decorations and family photos, I made a decision. I was going to fight for my home and my independence. Not just for myself, but for every older person who'd been made to feel like their own wishes didn't matter. I just hoped I was strong enough for the battle that was coming. The week between Christmas and New Year's was usually my favorite time of year. The house would be filled with the lingering warmth of holiday celebrations, and I'd spend quiet days reflecting on the year past and planning for the year ahead. This year, however, the silence felt ominous rather than peaceful. Richard and Jessica hadn't spoken to me since our confrontation before Christmas. They'd taken the children to Jessica's parents for the holiday, and for the first time in 8 years, I'd spent Christmas Day alone. Eleanor had invited me to join her and her daughter's family, but I'd politely declined, needing time to process everything that had happened. I should have known the silence wouldn't last. On December 30th, my doorbell rang at 8 in the morning. I was still in my robe, having my first cup of coffee, when I opened the door to find a man in a suit holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Gary Mitchell from Prestige Home Inspections. I'm here for your scheduled inspection." I stared at him in confusion. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I didn't schedule any inspection." He checked his clipboard. "Shows here it was arranged by your son, Dr. Richard Thompson. He said you were considering selling and wanted a comprehensive inspection to determine what repairs might be needed." My blood turned to ice. "Did what?" "Mom, I can come back another time if this isn't convenient," the inspector said, clearly sensing the tension. "No," I said firmly. "There won't be another time. I am not selling my house. I did not request an inspection, and my son had no right to schedule one. Please leave." After the inspector left, I called Richard immediately. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting my call. "Hi, how was your Christmas?" "Don't you dare," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Don't you dare pretend this is a social call. Why did you schedule a home inspection without my permission?" There was a pause. "Mom, I was just trying to help. If you ever do decide to sell, it would be good to know what kind of repairs." "I am not selling my house," I interrupted. "And even if I were, that would be my decision to make, not yours." "Look, I understand you're upset," Richard said, his voice taking on that calm, reasonable tone that I now recognized as manipulation. "But I think you're overreacting. It was just an inspection." "It was a violation of my privacy and my autonomy," I shot back. "You have no right to make decisions about my property without my consent." "Mom, I'm worried about you. This level of paranoia isn't normal. Maybe you should talk to your doctor about." I hung up on him. I actually hung up on my own son, something I'd never done in my entire life. But hearing him suggest that my perfectly reasonable anger was somehow a sign of mental decline made me see red. The phone rang again immediately, but I didn't answer. It rang 4 more times over the next hour, but I ignored it each time. That afternoon, Eleanor found me sitting in my living room, staring at the wall. "Maggie, your phone's been busy, and I saw the inspection van this morning. What's going on?" I told her about the unauthorized inspection and Richard's response to my anger. Eleanor's face grew darker with each detail. "Oh, honey," she said when I finished. "This is escalating beyond normal family pressure. What Richard did today was completely inappropriate, and his suggestion that your anger is a sign of mental problems." She shook her head. "That's gaslighting, plain and simple, gaslighting. It's a manipulation tactic where someone tries to make you question your own sanity or perception of reality." by suggesting that your perfectly reasonable anger about his overreach is somehow a sign of mental decline. He's trying to make you doubt your own judgment. I felt like I was drowning. Eleanor, what if he tries to have me declared incompetent or something? He's a doctor. People would listen to him. Eleanor sat down beside me and took my hands. Maggie, listen to me. You are completely competent. You manage your own finances, maintain your home, care for your grandchildren, and make rational decisions every day. One doctor's opinion, especially one with a clear conflict of interest, isn't going to change that. But even Eleanor's reassurance couldn't shake the fear that had settled in my chest. Richard wasn't just trying to pressure me anymore. He was actively working against me, and he was using his professional credibility as a weapon. The next violation came 3 days later. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard someone in my garage. I looked out the window and saw Richard's car in my driveway, but I hadn't heard the doorbell or a knock. I walked to the back door and found Richard in my garage, going through James's old toolbox. Richard, what are you doing? He looked up, not seeming the least bit guilty about being caught. Oh, hi Mom. I was just checking to see what tools Dad had left. Some of these are pretty valuable vintage pieces. It seems wasteful to let them just sit here collecting dust. Those are your father's tools, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They stay where they are. Mom, be practical. You don't use them. And they're just deteriorating in this damp garage. I could take them to my house where they'd be properly stored, and maybe Jake would enjoy using them when he's older. The presumption in his words took my breath away. Richard, get out of my garage now. Mom, I'm just trying to. Get out, I said more forcefully than I'd ever spoken to him in his life. And give me your key. All of your keys to my house. What? You heard me. I want every key you have to my house. Right now? Richard's face flushed. Mom, that's ridiculous. What if there's an emergency? Then I'll call 911 like any other adult. But you are no longer allowed to enter my property without permission. Give me the keys. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. We stood there in my garage, surrounded by James's carefully organized tools, having a standoff that would have been unthinkable just 6 months ago. Finally, Richard pulled out his keychain and removed 2 keys, the front door and the back door. He handed them to me with barely controlled anger. I can't believe you're doing this, he said. I'm your son. I'm trying to help you. If you want to help me, Richard, then respect my boundaries and stop trying to control my life. After he left, I called a locksmith. By evening, I had new locks on both doors and a new garage door opener. For the first time in months, I felt truly secure in my own home. But my security was short-lived. The retaliation came swiftly, and where it would hurt me most. Through the grandchildren. Emma and Jake had been scheduled to spend the weekend with me, something we'd been doing twice a month for years. But on Friday evening, instead of bringing the children over, Richard called. Mom, we've decided the kids won't be staying over anymore. My heart stopped. What? Why? Jessica and I have been talking, and we're concerned about their safety in that old house. The stairs are steep. The electrical system is outdated, and after your outburst the other day, we're not sure you're in the right frame of mind to be responsible for young children. Richard, you cannot be serious. I've been watching those children since they were babies. I've never had so much as a scraped knee happen on my watch. Things change, Mom. We have to put our children's safety first. I could hear the smugness in his voice, and I realized this wasn't about safety at all. This was punishment for standing up to him. He was using my grandchildren as weapons against me. You know what this is really about? I said quietly. This isn't about safety. This is about punishing me for refusing to give you what you want. I don't know what you're talking about, Richard said, but his tone suggested otherwise. Can I at least talk to them? Say good night? They're already in bed. Maybe another time that we both knew wouldn't come. After he hung up, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the children's toys that were still scattered around from their last visit. A half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit that she'd left behind. Jake's little cars lined up on the windowsill where he'd been playing, parking lot. The silence in my house felt different now. Not peaceful, but hollow, empty of the laughter and chatter that had given my life so much meaning. Eleanor found me there an hour later, crying into Emma's stuffed rabbit. Oh, sweetie, she said, sitting down beside me. What happened? I told her about Richard's decision to cut off my access to the grandchildren, and I watched Eleanor's expression shift from sympathy to something harder. Maggie, this has gone beyond family conflict. What Richard is doing is called parental alienation, and it's a form of emotional abuse. He's using those children to control and punish you. But they're his children, I said through my tears. He has the right to make decisions about them. He has the right to make reasonable decisions about their welfare. Eleanor corrected. But using them as leverage to force you out of your home, that's not about their welfare. That's about his agenda. Eleanor helped me see that I needed to start documenting everything. She suggested I keep a journal of every interaction, every phone call, every manipulation tactic. If this escalates further, you're going to need evidence, she said. That night, I started my journal. I wrote down everything I could remember: the overheard phone conversation, the unauthorized inspection, Richard taking my keys, the sudden end to the children's visits. Seeing it all written down in black and white made the pattern of manipulation undeniable. But even as I documented Richard's behavior, I couldn't shake the grief of losing daily contact with Emma and Jake. They were innocent victims in this conflict, and the thought that they might be confused or hurt by the sudden change in our routine broke my heart. The final blow came the following Tuesday. I was getting my mail when I noticed a "for sale" sign in my front yard. My hands shaking, I ran inside and called the number on the sign. A cheerful real estate agent answered. "Brookstone Realty. This is Sandra speaking. This is Margaret Thompson. Why is there a for sale sign in my yard? I never listed my house for sale." "Oh, Mrs. Thompson, I've been trying to reach you. Your son, Dr. Thompson, contacted us about listing your property. He said you decided to downsize but were feeling overwhelmed by the process, so he was handling the details for you. He had no authority to do that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh my. This is awkward. Let me call Dr. Thompson right away and sort this out." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. My son had tried to sell my house without my permission. My own son. When Richard called an hour later, I was ready for him. "Mom, there's been a misunderstanding with the real estate agent." "There's been no misunderstanding," I said coldly. "You tried to sell my house behind my back. I was just getting preliminary information about the market. I never authorized any actual listing." "Richard, stop lying to me. The agent said you told her I'd decided to downsize and that you were handling it for me." There was a long pause. "Mom, I think you need help. This level of suspicion and hostility isn't normal. Maybe it's time to consider that you're not thinking clearly anymore." Again with the suggestion that I was losing my mental capacity. But this time, instead of making me doubt myself, it made me furious. "Richard James Thompson," I said, using his full name the way I had when he was a child in trouble. "I am thinking more clearly than I have in months. Clear enough to see that my own son is trying to steal my home out from under me. Clear enough to recognize manipulation and gaslighting when I see it, and clear enough to know that this stops now." "Mom, you're overreacting." "No, Richard. You're underestimating me. And that's going to be your biggest mistake." I hung up and immediately called Eleanor. "It's time," I told her. "Whatever you think I should do to protect myself, it's time." Because I finally understood that this wasn't a family disagreement that could be resolved with love and patience. This was a battle for my home, my independence, and my dignity. And I wasn't going to lose without a fight. Eleanor arrived at my house within an hour of my call, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the determined expression I imagined she'd worn during her 30-year career as a social worker. "Maggie, we need to talk about your legal position," she said without preamble. "And I think it's time you knew some things about your own situation that might surprise you." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd made so many decisions about Richard's future over the years. Now I was fighting for my own future, and I felt the weight of that irony. "First," Eleanor said, opening her portfolio, "I want you to understand your rights as a homeowner. No one, not even your son, can force you to sell your property or leave your home unless you're declared legally incompetent by a court, and that requires extensive medical and psychological evaluation by multiple professionals." "But Richard is a doctor," I said. "Doesn't that give him some kind of authority?" "Absolutely not. Being a doctor doesn't give him any legal authority over your personal affairs unless you've specifically granted him power of attorney, which you haven't, right?" "No, never." "Good. Second, what Richard did with the real estate agent was actually illegal. It's called fraud, and you could press charges if you wanted to." The word fraud hit me like a physical blow. My son had committed fraud against me. "I don't want to send my son to jail, Eleanor," I'm not suggesting you should. I'm just making sure you understand that what he's doing isn't just morally wrong, it's legally wrong. That gives you power. Eleanor pulled out a notepad. No, I need you to tell me everything you can remember about your financial situation. Bank accounts, investments, insurance policies, anything your late husband might have left you. I felt embarrassed. Eleanor, I'm not wealthy. I have my teacher's pension, Social Security, and a small savings account. Maybe $40,000 total. What about life insurance from your husband? There was a policy, but I used most of it to pay off the mortgage and help Richard through medical school. Most of it? I tried to remember. It had been so long ago, and I'd been so overwhelmed with grief and the practical details of being suddenly widowed. There might have been some left over. I think I put it in a long-term CD or something. But Eleanor, it couldn't have been much. When was the last time you looked at your bank statements carefully? I felt my cheeks burn. I don't really. I have direct deposit for my pension and Social Security, and I just check my balance at the ATM when I need cash. As long as there's enough to cover my expenses, I don't pay much attention. Eleanor's eyebrows went up. Maggie, when's the last time you met with a financial advisor or reviewed your investments? Investments? I don't have investments. I'm just a retired teacher. Honey, I think you need to make some phone calls. Do you have any paperwork from when James died? Insurance documents, bank statements from that time. I led Eleanor to James's old desk in the spare bedroom. I'd barely touched it since he died, keeping it exactly as he'd left it except for dusting. The drawers were full of papers I'd never had the heart to go through. Eleanor and I spent the next 2 hours sorting through documents. What we found changed everything. James, it turned out, had been much more financially savvy than I'd ever known. In addition to his life insurance policy, he'd had several investment accounts that I'd forgotten about or never fully understood. The small amounts I remembered had been growing, compounding, reinvesting for 25 years. Maggie, Eleanor said, her voice carefully controlled, do you see this account statement? I looked at the paper she handed me. It was dated 3 months ago and showed an account balance of $347,000. That can't be right, I whispered. Eleanor handed me another statement. This one shows $89,000, and this one, $125,000. My hands were shaking as I looked at document after document. Investment accounts, bonds, stock dividends that had been automatically reinvested for decades. Altogether, in addition to my house and the small checking account I used for daily expenses, I was worth over $500,000. I don't understand, I said. How could I not know about this? These statements are being mailed to a P.O. box, Eleanor said, pointing to the address. Did James have a P.O. box? Yes, he used it for his business papers. But I closed it after he died. I paused, trying to remember. Or I thought I did. Eleanor was looking through more papers. Maggie, look at this. There's a letter here from the post office dated 5 years ago. It says the box rental was being transferred to Richard Thompson, and all future mail would be forwarded to his address. The room seemed to spin around me. Richard has been getting my financial statements for 5 years. It looks like it. And Maggie, if he's been receiving these statements, he knows exactly how much you're worth. The implications hit me like a truck. Richard hadn't just recently decided I should move out of my house. He'd known about my substantial assets for years, and he'd been planning this campaign to get me into a nursing home while he inherited my house and my money. That's why he's been so insistent about the expensive retirement communities. I said, the pieces finally falling into place. If I'm spending $4,000 or $5,000 a month on assisted living, my savings will be depleted in just a few years, leaving only the house. Eleanor nodded grimly. And if you die in a facility, he inherits everything. But if you live independently in your own home, you could live comfortably for decades, and there would be much less left for him to inherit. I felt sick. My son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, had been systematically planning to rob me of my independence and my security for years. Eleanor, what do I do? First, we're going to that bank tomorrow morning, and you're going to take control of your own finances. You're going to change all the addresses to your home address, set up online access to your accounts, and make sure Richard can't access any information about your financial situation. What if the bank won't let me? What if they think I'm too old or incompetent? Eleanor smiled for the first time that day. Honey, you're about to walk into that bank as a woman worth over $500,000. Trust me. They'll listen to you. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the conversations Richard and I had had about money over the years. How he'd expressed concern about my finances. How he'd suggested I might need help managing my affairs as I got older. How he'd volunteered to take care of the details if I ever needed assistance. He'd been positioning himself as my financial protector while secretly monitoring my assets and planning to claim them. The next morning, Eleanor and I went to First National Bank, where James and I had done our banking for 30 years. I walked in feeling nervous and uncertain, but Eleanor was right. When I explained that I needed to review my accounts and update my information, the bank manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, treated me with the utmost respect and attention. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so glad you came in," she said. "We've been concerned about the unusual arrangement with your statements going to the P.O. box and then being forwarded. It's not typical, and we've had some questions about whether you were receiving important financial information." "Questions from whom?" "Well, your son has called several times over the years, asking about your account balances and investment performance. We've always referred him to you, of course, since we can only discuss account details with the account holder." More evidence that Richard had been monitoring my financial situation. But Mrs. Rodriguez's next words gave me hope. "However, we did notice that he never seemed to actually discuss these matters with you, since you never called us back or came in to review anything. Some of us wondered if there might be a communication problem." I spent 2 hours at the bank, updating my address information, setting up online access to all my accounts, and learning for the first time in 25 years exactly what my financial situation was. By the time we left, I felt like a different person. I wasn't a poor widow living on a modest pension. I was a financially secure woman with substantial assets and complete control over my own affairs. That afternoon, I called the law office that had handled James's estate 25 years ago. The original lawyer had retired, but his son now ran the practice. I made an appointment for the following week. "I want to make sure my will is updated and my affairs are in order," I told the receptionist. What I didn't say was that I wanted to make sure Richard couldn't manipulate or coerce me into signing anything that would give him control over my assets. Eleanor and I also went through the rest of James's papers and made some other interesting discoveries. James had been meticulous about keeping records, and we found documentation of every penny I'd spent on Richard's education and early career, college tuition, medical school loans I'd co-signed, the money for his wedding, even smaller amounts for his first apartment and car after residency. Altogether, I had invested nearly $200,000 in my son's future. Not that children owe their parents anything for raising them, Eleanor said as we tallied up the amounts. But this puts his current behavior in perspective. You've already given him the equivalent of a house, and now he wants your actual house too. The final revelation came when we were organizing all the paperwork into folders. Eleanor found a document I'd completely forgotten about, a letter James had written to me shortly before he died, meant to be opened after his funeral. My hands trembled as I read his words. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're facing life without me. I know how scared you must be, and I know you're worried about money and taking care of Richard on your own. But I want you to know that I've made sure you'll be comfortable for the rest of your life. The investments I've made will grow over time, and you'll never have to depend on anyone else for your security. Be careful who you trust with information about your finances. Even people who love us can sometimes prioritize their own needs over ours. You are stronger than you know, and you deserve to live your life on your own terms. Don't let anyone, not even Richard, make you feel like you're a burden or that you need to be taken care of. You've taken care of everyone else your whole life. Now take care of yourself. All my love, James." I read the letter 3 times before I could speak through my tears. James had known. Somehow, he'd known that there might come a day when I'd need to protect myself, even from our own son. "He was trying to protect you," Eleanor said softly. "He knew you were going to be vulnerable as a widow, and he wanted to make sure you'd have both the resources and the strength to protect yourself." That evening, I sat in my living room, in my own house, surrounded by my own possessions and memories, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. I felt powerful. Richard thought he was dealing with a helpless elderly woman who could be bullied and manipulated into giving up her home. He had no idea that he was actually dealing with a financially secure, legally protected woman who was finally beginning to understand her own strength. The confrontation that would give this story its name was coming. But now, instead of dreading it, I was almost looking forward to it. It was time for my son to learn who he was really dealing with. 3 weeks had passed since my discovery of the financial documents, and I'd spent that time quietly preparing for what I knew was coming. I'd met with the lawyer, updated my will, and established clear legal protections for my assets. Most importantly, I transferred all my account information back to my own address and set up security protocols that would prevent anyone else from accessing my financial information. I hadn't confronted Richard about the intercepted mail yet. Eleanor and I had agreed that it would be better to wait, to let him reveal more of his true intentions before I played that card. But the waiting was torture, especially because it meant continuing to pretend that our relationship was normal when everything had changed. The call came on a Tuesday evening in mid-January. "Mom, we need to talk," Richard said without any greeting. His voice was tight, stressed. "Jessica and I would like to come over tomorrow evening. It's important." "Of course, honey," I said, though my stomach immediately nodded. "Is everything all right? We'll discuss it tomorrow. Just be prepared for a serious conversation." After he hung up, I called Eleanor. "This is it," I told her. "Whatever they're planning, tomorrow night is when it happens." Eleanor came over the next afternoon to help me prepare. We set up my phone to record conversations, something the lawyer had suggested for my own protection. We also reviewed everything I'd learned about my legal and financial position. "Remember," Eleanor said, "you don't have to agree to anything tomorrow night. You don't have to sign anything, commit to anything, or even discuss anything you don't want to discuss. This is your home, and you're in control." Richard and Jessica arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, both dressed as if they were going to a business meeting. Jessica carried a large folder, and Richard had his laptop bag. They looked like they were coming to negotiate a contract, not visit family. "Hi, Mom," Richard said, giving me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. Jessica smiled but didn't offer any physical greeting. "Can I get you coffee, tea? I made some cookies this afternoon," I offered, falling back on the habits of hospitality even as my nerves screamed with tension. "No, thank you, Maggie," Jessica said briskly. "We really need to get right to business. Business. Not a family discussion, but business." We sat in my living room, Richard and Jessica on the couch across from my chair. Jessica opened her folder and Richard opened his laptop. I felt like I was about to be audited. "Mom," Richard began, "we've been doing a lot of research and thinking about your situation, and we've come up with what we think is the perfect solution for everyone." "My situation? Your living situation? Your financial situation, your future care needs," Jessica said, pulling papers from her folder. "We've found an absolutely beautiful assisted living community called Golden Years Manor. It's only 20 minutes from our house, and they have an immediate opening." She handed me a glossy brochure. The place looked expensive and institutional, despite the marketing photos of smiling elderly people engaged in craft activities. "I've told you before, I'm not interested in assisted living," I said as calmly as I could. "Mom? Just hear us out," Richard said. "We've crunched all the numbers, and we think this could work perfectly." He turned his laptop screen toward me. "Look, we've estimated your monthly expenses, your income, and the cost of the facility. If you sell the house, the proceeds plus your savings should cover your expenses for at least 15 years. I stared at the spreadsheet on his screen. It was detailed, thorough, and based on financial information that I knew he shouldn't have. "How do you know what my savings are, Richard?" He looked uncomfortable for just a moment. We made some educated guesses based on your lifestyle and your pension. It was a lie, and we both knew it." "This community is really special, Maggie," Jessica said, pulling out more brochures. "They have a full activities program, 3 meals a day, housekeeping, and medical staff on site 24 hours. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." "I don't want to not worry about anything," I said. "I want to manage my own life." Richard and Jessica exchanged one of their looks. "Mom, that's exactly what we need to talk about," Richard said. "Your judgment hasn't been optimal lately. The paranoia about the home inspection, changing the locks, accusing us of trying to manipulate you. These aren't the actions of someone who's thinking clearly." There it was again, the suggestion that my completely reasonable responses to their unreasonable behavior were signs of mental decline. "My judgment is fine, Richard. Is it?" Jessica leaned forward. "Maggie, you're living alone in a house that's too big for you, refusing help from people who love you, and becoming increasingly isolated and suspicious. These are classic signs of cognitive decline in elderly people. The word elderly hit like a slap. I was 68, not 98. I am not cognitively impaired, I said firmly. I am a grown woman making rational decisions about my own life. Mum, Richard's voice took on that patient, condescending tone I'd grown to hate. We've already put a deposit down at Golden Years Manor. They're holding a lovely suit for you, but we need to make a decision by the end of the week. The room went silent. They'd put down a deposit without my knowledge or consent. You did what? It's refundable if you decide against it, Jessica said quickly. But Mom, may I call you Mom? We really think this is what's best for you. And honestly, it would be such a relief for Richard to know you're safe and cared for. What about Emma and Jake? I asked. When would I see them? Another look passed between Richard and Jessica. Well, that's something we need to discuss, Richard said carefully. The facility has very specific visiting hours and policies, and with the new baby coming, we're going to be pretty busy for the next few years. What are you saying? Jessica took over. We're saying that this transition might be a good time for the children to adjust to a different relationship with you. More of a special occasion relationship rather than a regular caretaking one. My heart stopped. They weren't just trying to take my home, they were trying to take my grandchildren. You want me to give up my house, move to an institution, and lose daily contact with Emma and Jake? You wouldn't lose contact, Richard protested. You'd see them on holidays, birthdays, special occasions, like any other distant relative, I said quietly. Mom, you're being dramatic. This is about what's practical and sustainable for everyone involved. I looked at the two people sitting in my living room, the son I'd raised and the woman he'd married, and I realized that they saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved. No. What? I said. No to all of it. No to the assisted living facility, no to selling my house, no to giving up my relationship with my grandchildren, no to letting you make decisions about my life. Just no. Richard's face flushed red. Mom, you're not being reasonable. I'm being perfectly reasonable. This is my home, my life. And my choice. Jessica's pleasant mask finally slipped. Maggie, you're being selfish. You're putting your own stubborn desires ahead of what's best for your family. My family? I stood up, my voice rising. What family? The family that puts deposits down on nursing homes without asking me. The family that wants to cut me off from my grandchildren. The family that breaks into my house and tries to sell it behind my back. One never tried to sell your house? Richard protested. You contacted a real estate agent and told her I wanted to sell.
That was just research. It was fraud, Richard. What you did was illegal.
Richard stood up too, his hands clenched into fists. Mom, stop this paranoid nonsense right now. We are trying to help you and you're acting like we're criminals.
You are criminals,
I shouted back.
You've been stealing my mail for 5 years.
You've been monitoring my finances without my permission. You've been lying and manipulating and scheming. And now you're trying to force me out of my own home. The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. Richard and Jessica stared at me with shock and something that looked like fear. How did you? Richard started, then stopped. How did I find out? I went through your father's papers, Richard. I found the letter from the post office. I know about the P.O. box. I know you've been getting my financial statements for years. Jessica's face had gone pale. Richard, you said she didn't know about? Shut up, Jessica. Richard snapped. So there it was. Confirmation that they'd been planning this for years. I know exactly how much money I have, I continued, my voice shaking with anger. I know about every investment account, every CD, every stock dividend. I know that I'm worth over $500,000. And I know that you've known that for years while pretending to be concerned about my finances. Richard's expression shifted from shock to something uglier. You don't understand, Mom. You can't manage that kind of money on your own. You need help. I need help. Richard, I managed to raise you, put you through medical school, and maintain my independence for 25 years after your father died. What makes you think I can't manage my own money? Because you're old, he exploded. You're getting old and confused, and you can't see what's best for you anymore. What's best for me, or what's best for you? Jessica stood up and moved to Richard's side. This is exactly what we were talking about, she said, her voice cold. The paranoia, the accusations, the inability to accept help. These are classic signs of dementia.
I do not have dementia! Then explain this irrational behavior, Richard shouted.
Explain why you can't see that we're trying to help you.
Because you're not trying to help me. You're trying to help yourselves.
You want my house and my money, and you want me out of the way. Richard's face was purple with rage now.
That's not true. We don't want your money.
Really? Then explain why you've been getting my financial statements for
5 years.
Explain why you tried to sell my house. Explain why you want me to spend $4,000 a month on a nursing home until my savings are gone. Because someone has to make the hard decisions, Richard screamed. Someone has to be the adult here.
I am the adult here. This is my house, my money, and my life.
Not anymore. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Richard looked as shocked as I felt that he'd said them. What did you say? I whispered. Richard's face was twisted with years of suppressed resentment. I said, not anymore, Mom. You had your turn. You raised me, you made your choices, you lived your life. But now it's my turn. It's my turn to have the house where I want to raise my children. It's my turn to have the financial security. It's my turn to make the decisions. I stared at my son. The baby I'd rocked to sleep, the child I'd taught to ride a bike, the young man I'd sent off to college with tears of pride in my eyes, and I didn't recognize him. Richard, I said quietly, you are not entitled to my life.
Yes, I am,
he screamed, completely losing control.
I'm entitled to inherit from my mother. I'm entitled to the house I grew up in.
Free. I'm entitled to not have to worry about taking care of you when you get too old and sick to take care of yourself. So this is about money.
This is about being practical. About planning for the future.
About making sure everyone gets what they deserve. And what do I deserve, Richard? He looked at me with eyes full of hatred that I'd never seen before. You deserve to accept that you're old and useless and that your time is over. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. One moment Richard was screaming at me, and the next moment my face was on fire and I was stumbling backward, my hand pressed to my cheek. The sound echoed through my living room like a gunshot. Jessica gasped. I stared at my son in shock, and he stared back at me with a mixture of rage and horror at what he'd just done. This isn't your home anymore, Mom, he said, his voice deadly quiet now. Get out. The words hit me harder than his hand had. This wasn't your home anymore. Get out. In that moment, standing in the living room where I'd celebrated every milestone of his life, where I'd nursed him through childhood illnesses, and helped him with homework and cheered his accomplishments, I finally saw my son for what he'd become, a stranger who hated me for not dying fast enough to suit his timeline. Get out, he repeated, stepping toward me menacingly. Get out of this house and into that nursing home where you belong before I do something we'll both regret. I touched my burning cheek and looked at this man who shared my blood, but not my values, who carried my name but not my love. No, I said quietly. What? I said, no, Richard, this is my house. If anyone's leaving, it's you. For a moment, I thought he might hit me again, but Jessica grabbed his arm. Richard, we need to go, she whispered urgently. We need to think about this. No, we're finishing this tonight. Richard snarled, shaking off her hand. Richard, she could call the police, you just assaulted her. That seemed to penetrate his rage. He looked at his hand as if he couldn't believe what it had done, then back at me. This isn't over, Mom, he said, his voice filled with menace. This is far from over. They gathered their papers and left, slamming my front door so hard that one of my family photos fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. I stood alone in my living room, my face still burning from my son's slap, looking down at the broken glass that had once held a picture of Richard's high school graduation. That's when I realized something important. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen with an ice pack on my cheek, staring at the broken picture frame I'd swept up from the living room floor. The photograph of Richard at his high school graduation was torn down the middle, separating his smiling face from mine as I stood proudly beside him. It seemed fitting. At 6 a.m, I called Eleanor. Maggie. What's wrong? You sound. Hey, hit me, I said simply. Richard hit me and told me to get out of my own home. Eleanor was at my door within 20 minutes, still in her bathrobe and slippers. She took one look at the bruise on my cheek and her expression hardened in a way that reminded me why she'd been so effective as a social worker. We're calling the police, she said immediately. Eleanor, I can't have my son arrested. Maggie, he assaulted you. In your own home, after trying to defraud you and steal your assets. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is criminal behavior. We argued about it for an hour, but Eleanor's professional experience won out. She helped me understand that by not reporting the assault, I wasn't protecting Richard. I was enabling him to escalate his behavior. What do you think he'll do next? She asked. If he's willing to hit you once, what's he willing to do to get what he wants? The police officer who responded to our call was a young woman named Officer Martinez, no relation to Eleanor. But the coincidence felt like a good sign. She was professional, thorough, and treated my report with the seriousness it deserved. Mrs. Thompson, domestic violence between adult children and their parents is more common than people realize, she explained as she photographed my bruise and took my statement. And when there are significant financial assets involved, it often escalates. You did the right thing by calling us. I filed a formal complaint and requested a restraining order. Within hours, Richard was legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of my property or contacting me directly. The restraining order was served to Richard at his medical practice that afternoon. According to Officer Martinez, who called to update me, he was shocked and indignant and claimed I was having some kind of mental breakdown. He kept insisting that you were incompetent and that he was just trying to help you, she told me. I informed him that incompetent people don't file coherent police reports or obtain legal representation, because that's exactly what I'd done. While Eleanor dealt with the police, I'd called my lawyer, Mr. Davidson, and arranged an emergency meeting. By the end of that day, I had not only legal protection from Richard, but a comprehensive plan for securing my financial future and protecting my assets. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Davidson said as we reviewed the documents, I want you to understand something important. What your son did, intercepting your mail, accessing your financial information without permission, attempting to list your property for sale, these aren't just unethical behaviors. They're felonies. Wire fraud, mail fraud, attempted real estate fraud. You could have him prosecuted. I don't want to destroy his career, I said. I just want him to leave me alone. Then we'll use the threat of prosecution as leverage. Sometimes the possibility of consequences is more effective than the consequences themselves. Mr. Davidson drafted a letter to Richard that was both thorough and devastating. It detailed every illegal action he'd taken, referenced the police report from his assault on me, and made it clear that any further interference with my life or property would result in immediate criminal prosecution. But the letter also offered him a choice. He could respect my autonomy and maintain a respectful relationship with appropriate boundaries, or he could face the full legal consequences of his actions. The letter was hand-delivered to Richard's office on Thursday. He called me on Friday, and for the first time in months, his voice held no trace of manipulation or condescension. He sounded scared. Mom, I got the letter from your lawyer. Good. I don't understand why you're doing this. I'm your son. Richard, you hit me. You told me to get out of my own home. You've been stealing my mail and monitoring my finances for years. You tried to sell my house without my permission. Being my son doesn't give you the right to abuse me. There was a long silence. I never meant for things to go this far, but they did go this far. The question now is what you're going to do about it. What do you want from me? It was the first time in months that he'd asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I should do. I want you to respect me as an adult capable of making my own decisions. I want you to stop trying to control my life. I want you to acknowledge that what you've done is wrong, and I want to see my grandchildren without conditions or manipulation. Jessica thinks we should just move on. Start over? You can't start over from a lie, Richard. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be built on honesty and respect. And if I don't agree to your terms, then you'll face the consequences of your actions, all of them. Richard didn't answer immediately, but when he did, his voice was different. Smaller. Can we meet? Somewhere neutral, to talk. After you comply with the restraining order waiting period and complete an anger management course? Yes, we can talk. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which I heard nothing from Richard or Jessica. But I wasn't sitting idle. I used that time to completely reorganize my life on my own terms. I hired a financial advisor, a woman recommended by Eleanor, and for the first time in my adult life, I learned to actively manage my own investments. I discovered that James's careful planning and my own conservative spending had left me in an even stronger financial position than we'd initially calculated. I also made improvements to my house, not because anyone had pressured me to, but because I wanted to. I had the roof repaired, the furnace serviced, and the front porch painted. I bought new furniture for the living room and had a security system installed. Every change I made was my choice, and that felt powerful. Most importantly, I started rebuilding relationships that Richard and Jessica's manipulation had damaged. I reconnected with old friends from my teaching days. I joined a book club at the library and a walking group in the neighborhood. I volunteered at the local elementary school, reading to children and helping with literacy programs. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not Richard's mother, not Emma and Jake's grandmother, not anyone's caregiver or dependent. Just Margaret Thompson, a capable, intelligent, financially secure woman living life on her own terms. When Richard finally called to arrange our meeting, I suggested we meet at Eleanor's house. I wanted the support of my friend, and I wanted Richard to understand that I wasn't alone in this. He arrived looking haggard and older than his 42 years. Jessica wasn't with him, which I took as a good sign. "How are Emma and Jake?" I asked before we discussed anything else. They miss you. They keep asking when they can see Grandma again." "And what do you tell them?" Richard looked down at his hands. "I tell them that Grandma and Daddy had a disagreement, but we're working it out." "That's a very diplomatic way to describe assault and attempted fraud." He flinched. "Mum, I am so sorry about that night. I don't know what came over me. I've never hit anyone before in my life." "You felt entitled to my life, Richard. You felt entitled to make decisions for me, to take my property, to dictate my future. That sense of entitlement made you feel justified in using whatever force was necessary to get what you wanted." That's what the anger management counselor said. "And what do you think about that?" Richard was quiet for a long time. I think I lost sight of who you are. I started seeing you as a problem to be solved instead of a person with your own rights and wishes." It was a start. "Richard, I need you to understand something. I am not your inheritance. I am not your responsibility. I am not your burden to manage. I am your mother, and I deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. I know. Do you? Because for months, you and Jessica treated me like I was incompetent, like my wishes didn't matter, like my only value was as free childcare until you could claim my assets. We never saw it that way. That's exactly how you saw it. And Richard, it nearly worked. If I hadn't found those financial documents, if Eleanor hadn't helped me understand what was happening, you might have succeeded in manipulating me into giving up my home and my independence." Tears started running down Richard's face. "I'm so ashamed, Mom. I don't know how I became the kind of person who could treat you that way. You became entitled. Success made you feel like you deserved more than you had earned. And Jessica." I paused, trying to be fair. "Jessica sees me as an obstacle to the lifestyle she wants. She's not evil, but she's not thinking about my well-being either. What can I do to fix this?" You can start by accepting that it might not be fixable. You can start by understanding that trust, once broken, it takes a long time to rebuild, and you can start by proving through your actions, not your words, that you respect my autonomy. Over the following months, Richard did try. He respected the boundaries I set. He didn't offer unwanted advice about my finances or my living situation. He didn't bring up assisted living communities or suggest that I needed help managing my affairs. Most importantly, he brought Emma and Jake to see me regularly, without conditions or manipulation. The first time I saw my grandchildren after that terrible night, Emma ran into my arms and whispered, "Grandma, I missed you so much. Daddy said you were sick, but you look fine to me." "I am fine, sweetheart," I told her. "Grandma's perfectly fine." Jessica took longer to come around. She was polite but distant during family visits, clearly resentful that her plan to claim my house had been thwarted. But eventually, even she seemed to accept that the old Margaret who could be bullied and manipulated was gone forever. 6 months after that confrontation, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I decided to travel, using some of my investment income. I booked a 3-week trip to Europe, something James and I had always planned to do, but never managed before he died. I visited London, Paris and Rome, staying in nice hotels and eating in good restaurants and buying myself souvenirs without worrying about the cost. When I called Richard from Paris to check in, he sounded genuinely happy for me. "Mom, you sound so alive," he said. "I am alive, Richard. That's what I've been trying to tell you." "I know, and I'm glad. I'm really glad you didn't let us, that you fought for yourself." It was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging how close they'd come to destroying my independence and dignity. Now, a year later, I'm sitting in my kitchen, in my own house, living my own life, writing down this story. Not because I want sympathy or revenge, but because I want other people in my situation to understand something important. You are never too old to fight for yourself. You are never too vulnerable to demand respect. and you are never obligated to sacrifice your independence to make other people's lives easier. Richard and I have rebuilt our relationship slowly and carefully. It's different now. There's less warmth but more honesty, less sentiment but more respect. He's learned to see me as a whole person rather than just his aging mother. And I've learned to love him while protecting myself from his potential for manipulation. Emma and Jake spend every other weekend with me now, and those visits are some of the happiest times of my life. They're older now, old enough to understand that families can have problems and still love each other, old enough to appreciate that their grandmother is a strong, independent woman who chose to fight for her own life. Jessica and Richard had their third child, a little girl they named Sarah. I've met her twice, and I've made it clear that I'm happy to be part of her life, on the same terms as her siblings. I will not be taken for granted, manipulated, or treated as a convenience. But I will be a loving grandmother to any child who wants me in their life. Most days I wake up grateful. Grateful that I found the strength to fight back. Grateful for Eleanor's friendship and wisdom. Grateful for James's foresight in protecting my financial security. Grateful that I didn't let fear or guilt or misplaced loyalty rob me of my independence. I am 69 years old now, and I am living the life I want to live. I am not a burden. I am not a problem to be solved. I am not an obstacle to anyone else's dreams. I am Margaret Thompson. This is my home, and I am exactly where I belong. If you're hearing this story and recognizing yourself in it, please know this: it's not too late. You deserve respect. You deserve dignity. You deserve to make your own choices about your own life, and you are stronger than you know. Don't let anyone, not even family, not even people who claim to love you, convince you that your life belongs to anyone but you. Because it doesn't. It belongs to you. This story has been shared with the hope that it will help others recognize and resist elder abuse in all its forms. If you or someone you know is experiencing manipulation, financial abuse, or pressure from family members regarding living situations or financial decisions, please reach out for help. You are not alone, and you deserve to live with dignity and respect.